Tutankhamun's golden mask has been examined and analyzed for a full century. Every centimeter of it appeared measured, documented, and thoroughly understood. Then a team with no particular connection to ancient Egypt pointed laboratory instruments built for jewelers and forensic work directly at that same piece of gold, equipment that had no obvious reason to be anywhere near a pharaoh's burial treasure. Nobody anticipated the metal was concealing anything further. It was the face. The entire world recognized it. Howard Carter discovered the entrance to Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings on the 4th of November, 1922. The expedition was backed financially by the wealthy British collector Lord Carnarvon. 3 additional years of painstaking excavation through chamber after chamber were needed before Carter's crew finally reached the mummy itself. On the 28th of October, 1925, they removed the lid from the innermost of 3 nested coffins and laid eyes on the golden mask for the first time in roughly 3,250 years. Carter wrote that the face appeared serene and striking, bearing the same likeness seen on the king's statues placed throughout the burial chambers. The mask stands approximately 54 centimeters in height, just over 21 inches, and tips the scales at more than 10 kilograms, around 22 pounds, crafted almost entirely from gold. Its eyes are formed from obsidian and quartz. The eyebrows and eyelids are inlaid with lapis lazuli, and a broad collar sweeping across the chest incorporates carnelian turquoise-toned glass and various other semi-precious stones. A cobra and a vulture rise upward from the forehead, symbolizing Lower and Upper Egypt united beneath a single ruler. 2 months following its discovery, the mask completed the 400-mile journey to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where it remained on public display for nearly 100 years before eventually being relocated to the new Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza after that facility fully opened in November of 2025. The updated exhibition allows visitors to walk entirely around the mask for the very first time, revealing the protective inscription carved across its back and shoulders. The old Cairo Museum had never permitted this particular angle. For close to 100 years, the mask had rested with its back pressed firmly against a wall. Throughout most of that time, it was regarded as a closed chapter of history, admired by many, yet rarely challenged. That certainty began to unravel the moment scientists finally turned genuine testing equipment toward the gold itself. The examination was not searching for anything unexpected. In 2014, a group of Japanese researchers, among them MC Uda, A. Ishaki, and Emsa Baba, were granted unusual access to study the mask using a portable instrument designed to read the chemical composition of metal without making any cuts or removing even the smallest fragment. Their equipment combined 2 separate techniques, X-ray fluorescence and X-ray diffraction, both of which direct a focus beam onto a tiny point on the surface, roughly 2 millimeters across, then capture what reflects back to identify precisely which elements and structures are present. The entire procedure took place in open air, leaving the mask completely unharmed. The aim was straightforward. The researchers hoped to document the materials used in the mask and in the matching golden throne recovered from the same burial chamber, verifying which decorative stones and colored glass had been used and how refined the gold truly was. No one on the team anticipated that the findings would raise any questions about what scholars had long accepted regarding the object. The study was released that same year within a book dedicated to Japanese Egyptologist Sakuji Yoshimura, intended as a reliable reference for those researching the subject later rather than as any kind of groundbreaking announcement. Yet the readings gathered from the face of the mask told a different story from the rest of the object. What lay just beneath the visible layer was unexpected. The scan confirmed that the gold sheets forming the bulk of the mask measured 23 carats, an exceptionally high purity, entirely consistent with Royal Egyptian metalwork. However, the surface of the face itself carried something additional. Resting directly on top of that 23-carat gold was a separate finishing layer, 18-carat white gold, barely around 28 nanometers in thickness, finer than the wall of a typical soap bubble, and entirely undetectable to the eye, without instruments capable of reading structures at that microscopic scale. That second layer had been sitting quietly on Tutankhamun's face for roughly 3,300 years, completely unnoticed by anyone. concealed within gold that appears solid and uniform when viewed without assistance. White gold takes on its lighter, cooler appearance because of metals blended into it, silver among them, which gave the face a noticeably distinct tone when compared to the richer, warmer yellow of the headdress and collar surrounding it. The goldsmiths of ancient Egypt clearly possessed the precision and skill needed to apply a coating this delicate and controlled. It was a level of artistry that modern conservators had not fully recognized until the scanning process brought it to light. Before continuing, if this kind of deep analysis is something you're finding worthwhile, please think about subscribing. It genuinely makes a difference for the channel. Uncovering a concealed coating specifically on the face immediately raised a very obvious question. Why would the face alone receive treatment that differed from everything else on the mask? And could that difference be connected to something broader? Researchers had already begun raising doubts about the mask's origins. The ears weren't adding up to the accepted story. British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves had been looking closely at that very question since 2001, though his ideas didn't attract widespread attention until 2015. Reeves drew focus to the ears on the mask, each one bearing a hole clearly intended to accommodate earrings. Within the royal visual tradition of ancient Egypt during that period, pierced ears were almost exclusively associated with children and women, never with a mature king depicted in his formal, official representation. Reeves made the case that no image of an adult male pharaoh anywhere within Egyptian artistic tradition shows him adorned with earrings, which makes that particular detail very difficult to account for if the mask had truly been created for Tutankhamun in his role as reigning king. Reeves linked the pierced ears to Nefertiti, a female pharaoh who held power briefly during the turbulent years following Akhenaten's passing and before young Tutan ascended to the throne. A number of historians hold the view that Nefertiti and Queen Nefertiti, Tutan's stepmother, were actually the same individual ruling beneath a different name. If that turned out to be the case, Reeves proposed that the mask or certain portions of it may have originally been crafted with her in mind. Zahi Hawass, who once served as Egypt's antiquities minister, pushed back firmly against this interpretation. He noted that pierced ears show up consistently across statues and depictions of 18th dynasty rulers from their earliest years, arguing that this detail alone tells us nothing definitive about gender or the intended recipient. That dispute over two tiny holes was merely the opening move. The real controversy centered on something etched directly into the gold itself, the queen who seemed to vanish from the historical record entirely. Nefertiti was the principal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who governed Egypt for roughly 17 years, beginning around 1353 BC. Akhenaten introduced one of the most unsettling religious transformations in all of Egyptian history, closing down the veneration of the traditional gods and elevating a single solar disk above every other deity. Throughout this era, Nefertiti occupied a remarkably visible position, appearing in temple reliefs, carrying out ceremonies that had nearly always been reserved for the pharaoh, and standing alongside her husband as something far closer to a co-ruler than a conventional queen. Then, somewhere around her 12th year, in the official records, Nefertiti simply vanishes from Egyptian inscriptions altogether. Historians continue to debate what followed. Certain scholars believe she passed away during this time. Some historians suggest she assumed a new identity as a female pharaoh, ruling under the throne name Nefertiti, either alongside Akhenaten or briefly following him before Tutankhamun came to power as a young child of around 9 years of age. A third possibility points to an entirely separate and still enigmatic ruler named Smenkhkare, who may have filled that same gap instead. Whichever version turns out to be accurate, Akhenaten's sweeping religious transformation collapsed almost at once following his passing. The royal court turned its back on his newly built capital, returned to the traditional seat of authority at Thebes, and reinstated the old gods to their rightful standing. Tutankhamun himself had originally been given the name Tutankhaten, honoring the sun disk his father had championed, and later renamed himself to pay tribute to Amun, the deity his family was determined to restore. Because so few reliable records survived from that turbulent period, historians have considerably less material to draw upon compared to almost any other chapter of Egyptian royal history. That very absence in the historical record is precisely why scholars turn to the mask's own metal with such focused determination, hoping the material might have preserved what the official inscriptions had failed to capture, the name concealed beneath the name. Reeves also turned his attention to the cartouche, the oval enclosure Egyptians traditionally used to frame a royal name pressed into the decorative straps running along the mask's shoulders. He noted that the surface surrounding Tutankhamun's name appeared visibly worn and altered when compared to the sharp, precise engraving found elsewhere across the mask. Examining faint underlying marks more carefully, Reeves concluded that the outline corresponded to an altogether different name, one reading Ankheperur Neferuaten, the very same throne name connected to the female pharaoh widely believed to have been Nefertiti herself. Reeves presented this argument formally in a paper titled Tutankhamun's Mask Reconsidered. Building on years of investigation into objects throughout the tomb that seem to have been repurposed from a previous owner, his theory suggests that when Tutankhamun passed away suddenly and unexpectedly at around 18 or 19 years of age, his officials had no properly prepared tomb or burial equipment waiting for him. Faced with that pressure, workers reached for whatever royal items were available, among them a mask that had been crafted years earlier for somebody else, then adjusted the name and facial features to suit their new ruler. That explanation only holds together if the physical evidence supports it, and researchers discovered more of that evidence hidden within the gold alloy itself. Two different golds, one single face. Independent testing carried out on the mask revealed that the gold used for the face registers at roughly 23.2 carats, while the gold found across the rest of the headdress and collar measures closer to 23.5 carats. The gap is modest, but consistent enough that Reeves made the case that the face had been crafted as its own distinct piece of metal and attached onto an already existing headdress, rather than being formed together with it in a single continuous pour. That argument aligns directly with what the 2014 scan had already demonstrated. A face bearing its own subtly different gold composition, then covered in an extremely thin layer of pale white gold that had gone unnoticed through 90 years of public display, points toward a face that was substituted in rather than being original to the object. Reeves argued that the Neem's headdress, the collar, and the ears were originally fashioned for Neferuaten, while the face visible today was fitted on afterward, replacing whatever face had been there before. None of this settled the theory beyond all doubt, but it handed both skeptics and supporters physical details worth pursuing through further examination. That deeper examination arrived sooner than anyone had anticipated, triggered by an incident that no one had seen coming, the mishap that forced everyone to take a much closer look. In August of 2014, staff at Cairo's Egyptian Museum accidentally dislodged the long braided beard from the mask while doing lighting repairs around its display case. Rather than reporting the incident through official channels, employees quietly glued the beard back on, using industrial epoxy, leaving a thick, noticeable ridge where the beard met the chin. The hasty repair went unnoticed by the public until January of 2015, when Egypt's Antiquities Ministry finally confirmed and disclosed the damage. Officials then brought in German conservator Christian Ekman, a specialist in the restoration of ancient glass and metalwork, to address the problem the right way. Beginning in October of 2015, Ekman guided a joint Egyptian and German team through a 9-week restoration process that involved carefully detaching the beard, removing the hardened epoxy, and securing it once more using beeswax, a material far more consistent with what ancient Egyptian goldsmiths would have originally used. Alongside this restoration work, the team carried out a full 3-dimensional scan of the mask, marking the very first in-depth study of its construction methods ever undertaken. That investigation uncovered something surprising. The beard had actually come detached on a previous occasion, sometime following the tomb's initial discovery, and hadn't been properly secured until 1946. 8 museum staff members, among them a former director, were subsequently fined and faced disciplinary action over the affair. The episode brought considerable international embarrassment to Egypt's antiquities community, yet it also produced the most detailed physical examination the mask had undergone since leaving the tomb. Even so, with all that fresh information available, not every researcher drew the same conclusions about the mask's origins. Some scientists urged caution. Egyptian officials and scholars have consistently maintained that the mask was created from the very beginning for Tutankhamun alone. Zahi Hawass has stated plainly that pierced ears alone prove nothing, since they appear across depictions of young 18th dynasty royals, regardless of gender. Sabah Abdel Razi, who once served as director at the Egyptian Museum, pointed toward the protective inscription carved across the back and shoulders of the mask, arguing that its wording repeatedly connects back to names and titles associated with Tutankhamun, which she said weakens any suggestion that the piece originally belonged to someone else. She also noted that during the 2015 restoration effort, the German-led team specifically searched for any trace of Nefertiti's name on the mask and came up empty. Reeves's wider theory, that Nefertiti's undiscovered resting place lies behind a concealed wall inside Tutankhamun's own tomb, met with equally strong pushback. Radar scans, carried out by a Japanese specialist in 2016, hinted at hollow spaces behind the tomb's northern wall, but a subsequent investigation by an Italian team from the Polytechnic University of Turin turned up no evidence supporting that interpretation. A thorough academic review conducted in 2021, covering every radar survey and argument on the matter, concluded that the combined evidence weighed heavily against the idea of a hidden Nefertiti burial, even while acknowledging that certain objects within the tomb had clearly been repurposed from an earlier owner. What endured through every round of that debate was the medal itself, resting exactly where the 2014 scan had located it, unchanged and unmoved, regardless of which side of the argument someone happened to favor or what conclusions they drew from it all. Once the competing theories are set aside, one fact continues to stand firm. A team equipped with tools designed for chemical analysis rather than archaeological work discovered a layer of 18-karat white gold, just 28 nanometers thick, resting on Tutankhamun's face, concealed within metal that countless millions had gazed upon directly for generations. That finding is not subject to the same debate surrounding the Nefertiti theory. It genuinely occurred, and yet no one recorded it until modern scanning technology finally brought it to light. Whether that concealed layer, along with the pierced ears and the worn cartouche, together point toward a borrowed identity taken from a long-forgotten queen, or simply represent the hasty and resourceful craftsmanship of ancient goldsmiths, remains one of the liveliest ongoing disputes within Egyptology today. The mask currently stands within the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, a vast institution spanning roughly 500,000 square meters, which at last brings together more than 5,000 artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb under a single roof. It is a place that Howard Carter's own team could never have pictured while standing inside that sealed chamber back in 1922. Researchers continue working to fully unravel the story behind a face the world believed it had already come to know. If you found this video worthwhile, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.